Hi, my name is Jallicia Jolly. I'm a class of 2014. Go 2014, go Eves. And my department is American Studies and Black Studies at Amherst College.
I'm very curious. Could you go over just, a few interesting factors that brought you to Williams in the first place?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're taking me back to 2009 when I applied. Well, first, I wanted an intimate environment, and I was intrigued by the fact that we would get to really know our professor. I wanted a communal space that was small. I figured it would be easier to navigate that at 17 than a sort of huge university. So I really appreciated that. I appreciated also the liberal arts element and the focus on humanities as a sort of something that's foregrounded for a broader exploration of self, of career choices, of, the things that set your soul on fire. And I was very much invested in setting my soul on fire. And so I appreciated those elements, and I wanted something completely different and new. And as someone who was coming as a as a 1.5 generation immigrant and Brooklynite coming from New York City, I got exactly that in Williamstown. So I just wanted a very different environment and a space to grow that was also communal, and something that would also challenge me. So that's really what attracted me to Williams. And also the fact that they provide really great financial aid is something that was important, because I knew at the time I couldn't afford to go to college. So those were all the wonderful elements, the mix of the academics with the space and its substance and what it has to offer.
Sort of what you majored in. What made you choose that?
Yeah, so I majored in women's gender and sexuality studies, and I concentrated in Africana studies and Spanish. And wow, you're taking me back to like 10 years ago.
Time
I
machine, yeah.
I know. So I think what made me want to major at the time, we couldn't major in Africana studies. So at the time, what made me really want to major in women's gender and sexuality studies is because I was very attracted to and found appealing a space that really foregrounded women's experiences and the sort of gendered and also non-gender binary sort of ways of existing in the world, and how that connected to a multiple things such as sort of economic, social experience, structural conditions, health outcomes, health trajectories, and political organizing. So I was fascinated by that sort of investment in looking at those sort of gendered experiences, but also the power imbalances and the possibilities that shaped women's experiences, particularly in the African diaspora, which really drew me to Africana studies. I really wanted a space that really provided me with the opportunity to see myself in the curriculum and in the content. And I was so wildly excited by Africana studies because of the people who were there at the time, but also because of the kind of training they provided to really give me a vocabulary to name my lived experiences before I even began on this intellectual journey. And so Africana studies emphasis on kind of global diasporic experiences, but also leveraging race as a category of analysis, systemic racism, racial inequality, racial justice as important sites of inquiry, was something that was important for me, right? Beyond just moments of crisis, what are the dimensions of the Black experience, and how can we use that for a critical study of race, gender, nation, sexuality from multiple theoretical and methodological perspectives? And so just being in Africana studies classes with professors such as Joy James, Leslie Brown, Neil Roberts, Professor Ron Minical Bryant, and David Smith, Shanti Singham, all wonderful professors who really provided me with the sort of vocabulary and tools to really understand this innovative knowledge, but also to grow into my own intellectual journey. And so I was taking anywhere from history, culture, art, writing, social relationships, studying political, religious, economic experiences of Black people in Africa, the Americas, and elsewhere in the world. That set my soul on fire. And I knew immediately that in addition to learning these new knowledges, I think having a vocabulary that taught me how to understand my own experience, but also provided an entrance for me into academia and into studying myself, but also Black women's lived experiences, was something that was fundamental to my survival at Williams College, and also to just thriving and navigating life in the space and beyond. And so that's really what drew me to Africana Studies, Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies.
Wow. I took a class my freshman fall with Neil Roberts called African Philosophy. And it was a great class. It's always like the class I talk about in interviews, and they're like, what is like an interesting classical Williams? I'm like, that's the one.
Was this social political contemporary theory, or was it Africana philosophy?
It was Africana philosophy.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So I actually learned the word African diaspora for the first time in Professor Neil Roberts' class. And actually, he was one of the first people who asked me if I wanted to be a professor. At the time, I didn't know what it meant to be a professor.
Oh, wow.
And he sparked a conversation with me, as well as a few others, about the Mellon Mays program, which is a pipeline equity-based initiative that provides mechanisms and support for underrepresented students to have careers in academia, particularly professorships. And so shout out to Neil Roberts.
Oh, shout out to Neil Roberts, definitely. So you were talking about your experiences through life after Williams. If you don't mind me asking, what does it feel like being a Williams alum at Amherst College?
Okay. So usually I get a lot of shade. Well, that question usually comes with a lot of shade. As in go Eves, right? There's always a go Eves component to it. But I can embrace both spaces. But I think one of the lovely things about being an Eve alum and professor at Amherst College is just, I would say, the deep connections in both spaces, not just in terms of their origins, but just kind of in their investments in hands-on mentorship, in the humanities, and sort of these intergenerational relationships that promote really deeper learning and self-discovery. I think those are all things that I find appealing, that I'm really attracted to, even now, 10 years later. It feels great to be in a space that sort of foregrounds those priorities for me. And it feels wonderful also to be in a space that not just has close proximity to Williams, but also that has all of these values of communal learning, of kind of in-depth exploration, has, the humanities components, with investments in the kind of Black studies that I see here, in the kind of sort of transnational, interdisciplinary, intersectional lens that I see in both of my departments, American Studies and Black Studies, and in the kind of work of the colleagues that I have the pleasure of being around, in which bears remarkable similarity to the ways in which I was taught and mentored as a college student a decade ago at Williams. And so I'm really grateful for them.
Yeah, interesting. And so going along the lines of sort of your work now and your research, your professorship, is there any interesting intersection between what you're doing now and what's happening in the world around like a topic like coronavirus, for example?
Absolutely. So thank you for that excellent question, because I think we're all trying to figure out life as we're a few days away from the elections, but also as we're living through a pandemic. My work studies the connection between pandemic, politics, and everyday life. And so it's interesting to see, and it's interesting to see these connections between coronavirus and HIV/AIDS. So I study HIV/AIDS in Black women's life. In particular, my broad research interest includes race, gender, sexuality, and health, Black women's activism, intersectionality and racialized health disparities, and transnational organizing and reproductive justice in the African diaspora. What does that all mean? So I'm really interested in sort of looking at the ways Black women have mobilized themselves and their communities in order to secure political rights, but also in order to access reproductive freedom and autonomy, in order to access also basic resources that are necessary for survival and community building and further political mobilization. And in particular, I'm working on a book project now called Ill Erotics, Black Caribbean Women in Self-Making in the Time of AIDS, that is specifically looking at young Black Jamaican women who are living and loving with HIV/AIDS at a very unique era, right? Where we're living right now, where there's a lot of discourse about HIV/AIDS, being conquered, I don't usually like to mobilize those kind of war language, but this is the discourse that focuses on, a linear progress narrative that assumes that we've defeated HIV/AIDS because of the advent of and medical advances and technology. And I think one of the things that many researchers and intersectional scholars of HIV/AIDS and feminist scholars and those in Black studies who focus on race, gender, health, and pandemics notice is that this sort of narrative really excludes the experiences of people of color, communities of color, and particularly Black folks. And so one of the ways my research intervenes in this conversation is really trying to move beyond the overrepresentation of this progress discourse, but also the exclusion of women in general and Black women in particular in the HIV/AIDS narratives and discourses, to really have us think a little bit deeper about the varied ways Black women, particularly young women, in an under-researched area such as the Caribbean, experience illness and inequality while making lives for themselves, and while building networks that are needed for their, not just only their survival, but in order to thrive. So my research has these deep connections between our current moment, because it's really encouraging us to think about which lives matter. And pandemics have a way, which lives and which bodies matter. Pandemics have a way of showing us whose lives and whose deaths matter. But what we know less about is how the everyday experiences of people really contest these discourses of contagion and these exclusionary state approaches to pandemics, to allow us to see what everyday people are doing in order to push back against exclusion, to push back against medical violence, and to really address health disparities in their own communities as they make life, meaningful lives for themselves. And so that's what I'm focused on currently.
If you were an ice cream flavor, which flavor would you be?
If I was an ice cream flavor, the flavor that I would be is grape nut or vanilla. So it's delicious, and you need to have grape nut ice cream. It contains neither grapes or nuts, but it is really delicious. It's like a rich vanilla custard ice cream that's really creamy and a little salty and sweet. Or I'll just stick with plain vanilla because I like plain vanilla.
Is there a book that you're currently reading that's really interesting?
So I have some space to read some wonderful things, not solely for class or for my research, but I'm actually reading something right now that is closely connected to my research, and it's an oldie but goodie called Lionheart Gal, Life Stories of Jamaican Women. So a lot of what I do is ethnographying life stories as my methodology. And I love reading this because it just kind of, in less academic jargon, talk about just the daily experiences of people, particularly women in Jamaica. And so it does inform my research, but I like sort of getting into the daily texture of people's lives in a different space from the one I frequent, to get an understanding of kind of the connections between our daily experiences and lived realities in different ways.
If you had a bumper sticker, what would it say?
Ooh, I think right now, the bumper sticker that I would need for myself to give me hope and that I would want to say is, there is a message in the mess.
That's great. That's also got alliteration. Like, there's a message.
There is a message in the mess, because we are experiencing a mess, and I do believe there is a message in it. I'm also trying to remain strategically optimistic as we approach an interesting election.
Yes, that's a good one. I don't watch football, so the election is as close as it gets to the Super Bowl for me. So I'm very excited.